One of the best reasons to own a 9mm revolver is so you can say, I need some clips for my 9mm Smith & Wesson. This phrase will trigger the pedantic gun people like no other. It'll cause aneurysms, and they'll rush to correct you, and they'll scream, it's not clips, it's magazines. And then you get to prove them wrong. Pedantic gun people just kind of annoy me. Sure, you should use the correct term, but if someone doesn't know the correct term, it's really not the big deal they make it out to be. Pedantic gun people tend to know very little about guns, just a few phrases that make them feel like they know a lot, and it's really fun to make those people wrong. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, I just got the new Smith & Wesson 940, which is a 9mm revolver. Now, I'm kind of used to 9mm revolvers. One of my first centerfire revolvers was a 9mm, specifically the Ruger LCR, which I still own, and it's become my bathroom gun, but that's a different story for a different time. Now, that was my only 9mm revolver till recently, when Smith & Wesson's new 940 caught my eye. I didn't need another 9mm revolver, but after looking at the 940, I wanted one. The 940 has come and gone out of Smith & Wesson's catalog, and currently it's back. It's a Davidson's exclusive, and it's not part of the Ultimate Carry lineup, but it does have that rear dovetailed sight. Now, specifically and literally, that's what caught my eye, that rear sight. I love the rear sight on my 432 UC, so when I saw Smith & Wesson roll it out on the 940, I had to try it. The rear sight on my 432 UC made the gun so much easier to shoot, especially at longer ranges, including up to 50 yards. Now, beyond the rear sight, we get an XS front sight. It's also a night sight. The grips are G10, but very small and compact. The barrel is fluted, and the stainless steel finish is absolutely fantastic. It looks great, but how does it handle? Well, before we tackle that, let's talk a little bit about 9mm revolvers. 9mm revolvers are interesting. I personally think the 32 H&R Magnum is the best snub-nosed caliber. If price and ammo availability wasn't a concern, it's the only caliber I'd ever prescribe for snub-nosed revolver. However, logistics exist, and budgets exist, and if you want an affordable, easy-to-find handgun round, the 9mm takes the cake. Ballistically, 9mm is essentially a hot 38 special load. Well, maybe a little more than that, depending on which cartridge you pick, but it's in the same class. It's not quite 357 Magnum, but it edges out the 38 special in ballistic performance. Now, with that said, it's also much cheaper and easier to find than 32 H&R Magnum, and it's just way cheaper than 38 special and 357 Magnum. This makes 9mm an attractive revolver round. It makes it an attractive anything round, to be honest. I can buy a box of 9mm for $10, and I can't do that with 38 special. Additionally, there are tons and tons of defensive 9mm loads. You can get reduced recoil rounds without operational concerns because it's a revolver. You can shoot hefty 9mm loads and bullets of every shape and design without a problem, thanks to revolver simplicity. However, that doesn't mean 9mm is perfect in a revolver. Unlike something like the 38 Special, the 9mm isn't a rim cartridge. This means the extractor present on revolvers can't kick the ammo out of the gun without a little help. You'll need moon clips, and the 940 comes with 3 moon clips, and extras are fairly easy to find. Moon clips are really neat, and the history is also kind of neat because it's tied to Smith & Wesson's history. Joseph Wesson created and patented moon clips, originally half moon clips, in 1917. America was going into World War I, and they didn't have enough 1911s. So they contracted Smith & Wesson and Colt to produce revolvers to supplement 1911 production, and they wanted them in .45 ACP. Again, logistics exist, and this made life a lot simpler. Colt and Smith & Wesson both created M1970 large frame revolvers for the U.S. military. Smith & Wesson created moon clips to allow for easy ejection and extraction. At the behest of the U.S. government, Smith & Wesson allowed Colt to use the moon clip design for free, so we can get more 1917s in the hand of doughboys going overseas. History's neat that way. Moon clips are neat. They allow for easy extraction and ejection, and they can act as speed loaders for quick reloads. There's a lot of 38 Special and 357 Magnum revolvers that come cut from moon clips just so they're faster to reload. A lot of competition pieces take this route. The downside is that they are thin pieces of metal that can easily bend and break if you're not careful. Once they bend, they're pretty useless. Now, loading moon clips is easy, but unloading them can be a pain. There is a tool, and I do suggest if you're going to get into a 9mm revolver, you buy that tool because it makes it easier to unload the cases and keeps your moon clips from bending. Now, moon clips aren't necessarily a bad thing, but you should know the upsides and downsides to them. Now, the real problem with 9mm revolvers comes from something called crimp jump. When manufacturers load 9mm rounds, they're loading them for semi-auto pistols. This means there isn't a ton of attention put on how tightly the brass case is crimped around the bullet. When you fire a revolver, the cartridges absorb all the recoil as the gun moves back and forth. This is putting a lot of G-forces on those rounds. That back and forth motion with every shot can create something that's like a pulling effect on the bullet. With traditional revolver rounds, like the .38 Special, the crimp is nice and tight to avoid this. With 9mm rounds, the crimp isn't all that tight, and the bullet can creep out of the case. Best case scenario, the bullet falls out and you lose a round. Worst case scenario is that the bullet gets stuck between the frame and cylinder and your revolver's now jammed up. That's not really what we want with revolvers. This is a bigger problem with lightweight revolvers, especially when loaded with hotter 9mm rounds. I've had this happen with my LCR when shooting the heavy 147 grain and 124 grain NATO loads. So the good news is that the 940 weighs 23 ounces and the LCR only weighs 17 ounces. A little extra weight absorbs a little bit of recoil, and one of the things I noticed shooting the 940 is I didn't run into any crimping problems, any bullet crimp problems. I shot some Spear 124 grain plus P rounds and some Federal HST 147 grains out of the 940 and didn't run into any crimp jump. So the 940 is a hefty revolver, so this seems to be less of an issue. I did shoot an entire case of S&B 115 grain 9mm through the gun without a single issue either. So, it's not that big of a concern, but it's something worth knowing. Additionally, if you're like me, you buy a lot of steel case 9mm because it's cheap. Steel case 9mm and revolver cylinders don't get along. They'll often expand and jam you up pretty good. And to get the rounds out of the cylinder, you'll probably bend your moon clip. I've done it a time or two. So I only shot brass case through this gun. So let's go over some of the finer details of this gun. As established, it's hefty at 23 ounces. The barrel's a little longer than your average modern snub nose. A modern snub nose barrel is usually about 1.87 inches. This one is 2.17 inches long. That barrel is also fluted, so it does look really, really nice. I don't know if there's any major benefits to the fluted barrel other than looking good, but I'll take it. The ejection rod is fully shrouded. This is a 5-shot revolver, and it uses the typical Smith & Wesson push-to-release cylinder design. Now, one of the great things about using a 9x19mm case is that the case is much shorter than the typical revolver round. The short snub-nosed ejection rod fully pushes the cases out of the cylinder, which isn't always the case with revolver link cartridges and snub-nosed revolvers. So this benefit is really that it allows for very smooth and easy extraction and ejection of spent cases. You're relying a lot less on gravity to eject everything, and you don't have to give the gun a jiggle to really make sure those cases all fall out. The grips are G10 and very grippy with these deep scallops that'll make sure your hand is not sliding or moving. So I'm currently in the southeast and it's about 80% humidity here and 96 degrees in the shade. My hands are pouring sweat, but the gun never slipped, never tried to fight its way out. The grips are fine overall. I do wish they were bigger. I want to replace them with the high horn grips you can find on the Ultimate Carry models. These grips are smaller, which makes them easier to conceal. However, I want the extra control and comfort offered by the high horn grips. Over the last few days, I've shot about 600 rounds out of this gun. That includes 500 S&B 115 grain, as well as the 50-round box of 147 grain and the 50-round box of... Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was a 20-round box. So I've fired 570 rounds. The 20-round box of Spear Gold Dot 124 grain plus P. The longest day of shooting was 200 rounds, and after that day, my hands were actually pretty beat up and sore and just tired. I think the high horn grips would be a little bit better for recoil management and definitely would have ensured my hands weren't so beat up at the end of a long day. Recoil is about the same as shooting a .38 Special plus P round. It's snappy and slaps the hand a bit. You need a good tight grip for a good control, ultimately. But it's not all that tough to shoot. It's not friendly to recoil adverse shooters. And if you're recoil sensitive, you might want to go with that 32 H&R Magnum or maybe even a 22 Magnum. But overall, the 9mm is not bad. I fired a series of simple drills from a pre-staged draw, meaning my hand was on the gun in my pocket, and I was able to draw and fire 5 rounds at an 8-inch circle at 7 yards in about 2 seconds. It usually hovered just above 2 seconds, but every round did hit the circle. So that shows that the gun is controllable, and it also shows the sights rule. Alright, since we're talking sights, let's talk about accuracy. The presence of a rear sight makes a big difference for me when it comes to shooting revolvers. I'm not a revolver expert, but I do want to be. I'm a subject matter enthusiast at best, especially with snub-nosed revolvers, and I'm no Daryl Bulkey. That rear sight just makes a huge difference, especially because I'm used to kind of semi-auto handguns. when I get that sight picture, it does feel very natural. So I shot the 940 at 5 yards, 7 yards, 10 yards, and even out to 25 and 50 yards. With my amateurish skills, I was able to land the majority of my hits at 25 yards on a big IPSC-sized steel target. At 50 yards, I wouldn't say it was the majority, but I did land a few, more than I thought I would, to be honest with you. And I think if I go back out there and I get a little practice, I could hit the majority at 50 yards. It's definitely a case of the Indian, not the arrow, when it comes to my accuracy with this gun. So at 7 yards, I produced a nice tight palm-sized grip, firing less than a second per round. At 10 yards, I could consistently make snap headshots from the draw on an FBIQ target. On that long 200 round day, which doesn't sound long, but felt long, I could see my accuracy degrade as my hands got tired from the recoil, but defensively that's unrealistic. No one is shooting 200 or even 20 rounds from a snub-nosed in a defensive encounter. However, I did notice that I started inducing my own flinch, and after noticing that flinch, I overcame it and was able to still shoot quite straight if you just focused and made sure I wasn't squeezing my whole hand when I fired the gun. The double action trigger isn't bad. It's no match trigger. I think the stock LCR trigger is much better, but overall the 940 is more than suitable for a defensive revolver. It's better than a lot of Smith & Wessons I've shot recently, but it's still not touching that ultimate carry or LCR kind of frictionless fit. Overall, for a snub-nosed revolver, I feel the 940 is accurate, and it's certainly accurate enough for your normal concealed carry encounter. I am a revolver amateur, and as you'll see from my reloads, that shows a lot. I'm a bit out of practice with revolvers, which is a shame to say because I love the 432 so much. But I did practice a fair bit, and with moon clips, I was able to shoot 5, reload, and shoot one more round in about 5 seconds. That's after a ton of practice, and admittedly is not impressive, but I was also putting the moon clips in the pocket of my running shorts, so that's not really a stable platform to draw from. But it's realistic because that's how I'm going to carry the gun most likely. So that's really the best part of this gun is the price of 9mm ammo, is that I can afford to practice a lot, and I can get faster. With each reload, I can get more accurate with each shot, and I can shoot just a ton more than I can with my 432 UC, or even with the 38 Special revolver. There's almost a good argument that I could use this as a training gun for my 432 UC, because if I'm dealing with more recoil, I'm learning how to control it a little better, and I can shoot it a lot cheaper. The weight of the 940 makes it a little less comfortable for pocket carry, but it's fine. Tighten your belt if that's the case. I do think this is a gun that's better suited for a holster on the waist than in a pocket carry, but if you're like me and you just love pocket carry for the convenience, you can get away with it. So the Smith & Wesson 940 does feel solid. It's 23 ounces, and that extra weight seems to overcome problems I've had with 9mm revolvers in the past. I really love that it gives us that dovetail rear sight for enhanced accuracy and a more user-friendly design. I do hope more companies adopt that kind of rear sight mentality. I just cannot use a trench to save my life. Now, since I'm thinking about tossing this thing in a holster instead of in my pocket, I think swapping the grips for something a little better makes a lot of sense. I'd rather holster carry this thing, and I'd rather be able to control it with greater ease, so I think I want those high horn grips. Aesthetically, this gun is very pleasing to the eye, and that might not count for much in a gunfight, but style's half the battle. I don't know. I think Smith & Wesson and Davidson has a real winner with the 940 series. It's not quite an ultimate carry gun, but it does have that ultimate carry price tag of about $9.99. So it's not cheap, but it is just so dang cool. If you don't feel that 9mm revolvers are heretical to the revolver world, then I think the 940 will scratch that itch if you want a revolver, you don't have one, and you don't want to deal with a new ammo type. Now, with that said, I'm interested in what you guys think, so please let me know below. Also, I guess I'm supposed to ask you if you should, or to subscribe and like and all that stuff. It helps with the algorithm, blah, blah, blah. If you like it and you want to subscribe, great. I appreciate it. If not, well, you've watched the entire video at this point, and I owe you for that. Have a great day, everybody.